U.S. Civil War.
Let's take a look at today's essential question. What were the long-term and immediate causes of the U.S. Civil War? Let's begin by examining the long-term causes. Number 1, sectionalism. Number 2, slavery. Number 3, westward expansion. Number 4, breakdown of compromise. Number 5, interpretation of state rights.
Sectionalism. Let's start by defining the concept of sectionalism. Sectionalism takes place when a country is deeply divided or fragmented along regional lines. During this time, people were more loyal to their region or section than to the United States as a whole. There were marked social, economic, and cultural differences between the North and the South. Essentially, the United States was so divided that it resembled not one but two different nations. Let's examine the nation's geography to understand the reasons for such division. In the mid-19th century, there were three distinct regions in the United States: the North, the South, and the West. The North. The North had a population of 9 million people. It included some of the largest urban centers in the United States: New York, Philadelphia, Brooklyn, and Boston. It was highly industrialized and concentrated most of the nation's manufacturing. European immigration was essential as a source of labor for this region. The South. The South had a population of 9 million people, which included 3.5 million slaves. It was a rural society with a rigid plantation system. There wasn't much industry in the South, and its economy was based on the export of cash crops, such as sugar, cotton, rice, and tobacco. Slavery, of course, was the main source of labor in this region. The West. The West had a population of just 5 million people. It was an area of vast agriculture production, known as the breadbasket of the United States. This region was full of small family-owned farms, and its products were sold to the North as well as the South. Slavery. By the time of the Civil War, slavery had been around for more than 2 centuries. The South saw slavery as the fuel of their economy, and its expansion as essential to the survival of the economic and social system. In the North, abolishing slavery in the United States became not just an important social and political issue, but a moral crusade. The abolitionist movement saw slavery as a moral evil that ought to be abolished. Former slaves such as Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and Harriet Tubman worked hard to end slavery, and soon became household names in the North. In addition, many individuals and groups in the North sympathized with the abolitionist cause and aided fugitive slaves to flee out of the South through the Underground Railroad. Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin, which quickly became a bestseller novel. Uncle Tom's Cabin revealed the horrors of slavery, and its plot became a topic of discussion throughout the country. Westward Expansion. After independence, the United States quickly expanded into the West. As new territories became states, they were faced with the question of slavery. Would they join the Union as free or slave states? While the South favored the expansion of slavery to the West, and believed that it was crucial to the survival of the plantation system, the North opposed any expansion of slavery. Breakdown of compromise. The issue of slavery led to carefully drafted legal compromises. The number of senators in favor and against slavery was kept balanced to ensure that slavery would not be abolished in Congress. With the admission of new states, compromises over slavery became less and less feasible. If you look at the table, the number of free and slave states had been growing at the same rate right up until the years before the war, when the number of free states began to increase more rapidly than the number of slave states. Some people in the South even suggested that the U.S. purchase Cuba from Spain. In this way, Cuba would join the Union as a slave state. This became known as Ostend Manifesto. And the purchase of Cuba? Well, there was so much opposition from the North that it never actually took place. We will look at 3 attempts at negotiations and compromise that ultimately led to failure. The Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, 1854, and 3 events that marked North-South relations and deepened national divisions in the 1850s. Bleeding Kansas, 1855 to 1857, the Dred Scott Decision, 1857, John Brown's Raid, 1859. The Missouri Compromise, 1820. As part of the Missouri Compromise, Maine came in as a free state in 1820. Missouri joined the Union as a slave state the following year. The 3630 north degree latitude line was set as a boundary, and all territories of Louisiana Purchase, all territories north of this line, were declared free of slavery. The Compromise of 1850. In 1850, the state of California joined the Union as a free state. The territories of Utah and New Mexico were open to slavery through popular sovereignty, meaning that the residents of those territories would vote to decide on the issues of slavery. Finally, a new harsh fugitive state law was passed. It required citizens in northern states to actively help return runaway slaves back to their owners in the South. As you can guess, people in the North were not happy about this law, as it completely undermined the abolitionist movement and the efforts of the Underground Railroad. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, 1854. In 1854, the territories of Kansas and Nebraska were opened for settlement. Even though the Missouri Compromise had declared these territories free, the Missouri Compromise was repealed, and the territories were open to slavery through popular sovereignty. Let's see if you can remember. Missouri Compromise of 1820. Maine admitted as a free state. Missouri admitted as a slave state. All territories north of the 36-degree line were declared free territories. Compromise of 1850. California was admitted as a free state. Utah and New Mexico would decide on slavery by popular sovereignty. A harsher Fugitive Slave Act was passed. Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. Opened the Kansas and Nebraska territories for settlement. Repealed the Missouri Compromise, opening these once free territories to slavery, decided on the principle of popular sovereignty. Bleeding Kansas. The debate of whether the territory of Kansas would be a slave or a free state was fierce. Settlers rushed to Kansas in great numbers, trying to influence the electoral decision and form 2 separate governments. There was violence, not just in the territory of Kansas, but on the Senate floor as well. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts denounced Senator Butler from South Carolina for embracing slavery. A few days later, Senator Butler's nephew beat Sumner unconscious with a walking cane. The Dred Scott Decision, 1857. Dred Scott was a Missouri slave who was taken along with his owner, John Emerson, when he moved to Wisconsin, a free territory. There, Scott married and had children. Scott and his family were taken back to Missouri when Emerson decided to move back to that state. Scott then sued his owner, seeking to free himself, his wife, and his children who were born in a free territory. Scott won in court in 1850, but unfortunately, the Missouri Supreme Court reversed the decision 2 years later. Dred Scott continued fighting and took his case all the way to the Supreme Court. What will the Supreme Court decide? Let's see. The case reached the Supreme Court in 1857. Chief Justice Roger Taney announced the decision for the case. Scott, as a black slave, was not a citizen, but rather property, and as property, he didn't have any rights, not even to sue in a federal court. The Missouri Compromise was declared unconstitutional because it limited property rights, and under our Constitution, Congress has no rights to legislate over property. Supreme Court decisions serve as a precedent to all future cases on the same issue. So even though Dred Scott was later freed by his owner, the Supreme Court decision still affected many African Americans and the efforts to end slavery. The Freeport Doctrine. Stephen Douglas argued that, despite the Dred Scott decision, slavery could still be excluded from territories of the United States through local legislation. John Brown's Raid, 1859. John Brown, an abolitionist from the North, thought it would be an ideal time for the slaves to revolt, like in Haiti. He and other abolitionists attacked Harper's Ferry for weapons, thinking that the slaves would quickly join them. The slaves did not join, and the revolt failed. Brown was hanged. Interpretations of state rights. The debate of where federal government rights over states stop has been ongoing since the creation of the Constitution until this very day. We will examine two issues. Nullification. A state's refusal to recognize an act of Congress because that state deemed it unconstitutional. Can northern states ignore the Fugitive Slave Act? Secession. Formal withdrawal of a state from the Union. Can states in the South secede from the Union?